The body was found around 11
Found in the Chattahoochee River.
Hours later, the body was brought out.
We were then getting victims turning up almost every week.
On June 21st, 1981, the arrest of Wayne Williams appeared to solve one of the biggest multiple murder mysteries in American history.
People were just wondering, when will this end?
Someone had to be convicted to stop the fear in Atlanta.
But now, troubling new questions are being raised about that conviction and the investigation that led to it.
I did not kill anybody. I did not hurt anybody.
Action News is next on WSB-TV Channel 2. It's 11 o'clock and there's a curfew in Atlanta. Do you know where your children are?
We do believe that the young boy is one of the 3 missing children from the Atlanta area.
In the fall of 1979, the people of Atlanta, Georgia, confront a terrifying reality. Children in the black community are being abducted and murdered.
Jeffrey Lamar Mathis, 10 years old, missing since March 11th when he left home to run an errand.
So I called Jeffrey, he was back in the back. And I said, Jeffrey, ma'am, I said, come in and go to the store for me and get me a pack of cigarettes. And I gave him $1. He went out the door, and I never seen him again.
Across Atlanta, one grim case follows another. Camille Bell recalls the day her son Yusuf agreed to run an errand for an elderly neighbor.
And we know that he got to the store, and we know that he brought the snuff, and we know that he left the store, and he disappeared off the face of the earth.
Yusuf Bell, 9 years old, missing from his home for almost a month.
Now, going to the store was not unusual. The store is only 3-4 blocks away, and this was something that kids did all the time.
Yusuf's body was found Thursday in an abandoned schoolhouse at Fulton and Martin Streets near the Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. Police believe the boy, who had been missing for 18 days, was strangled.
At first, no one realizes the full extent of the horror because there is no coordination between different police agencies.
So Detective A working on case A, you had Detective B working on case B, and neither detective talking to each other.
It is the mothers of the victims, drawn together by their mutual frustration and grief, who see the similarity of the cases and the likelihood of a single killer.
We decided as a group to go and tell the mayor and the police commissioner what was happening.
It was horrible because you had African-American elected officials who couldn't seem to get a handle on what was going on with the death of these children and some adults. And it was very embarrassing.
Finally, on July 17, 1980, Mayor Maynard Jackson announces the formation of the Special Police Task Force on Missing and Murdered Children.
Somewhere out there knows what we're looking for, knows who's doing this insane series of acts and attacks on our children.
Atlanta Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown went on local television to ask for help.
If you have any information, please call the Special Task Force on Children at 658-6818.
In part, because all the victims are black, rumors begin to circulate that the Ku Klux Klan is behind the killings. Many Atlanta citizens, black and white, believe the city may be moving toward rioting and widespread racial violence. On October 13, 1980, another tragedy pushes fear and anger to the breaking point.
The explosion was so intense, it blew the roof off, threw little children outside, killing 4 instantly.
The explosion at a daycare center convinces many in the black community that they are under siege.
Maynard Jackson, the mayor of Atlanta, was called to the scene, and he had to get on a bullhorn and quiet the crowd down and calm them down.
That's where we need to be.
And at that point, you could sense there was something building in Atlanta.
It is later revealed that a faulty boiler is the cause of the explosion. But the event galvanizes the city. The black community demands answers. City Councilman Arthur Langford initiates a community-wide effort called Saturday Searches. On the very first Saturday, volunteers combing a vacant lot discover the remains of 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson. The searches continue as more bodies are discovered. Atlanta's nightmare makes headlines around the world. Finally, yielding to political pressure from Atlanta's mayor, Washington sends 200 FBI agents to the city. The murders continue and the fear mounts. The city offers a $100,000 reward for finding the killer or killers.
When Muhammad Ali announced he would add to the reward fund, making it $500,000, even city officials were surprised. They had been told early this morning Ali was planning to contribute, but they had no idea it would be that much.
Even more money is raised when Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. stage a concert to benefit the task force investigation. Finally, President Reagan names Vice President Bush to coordinate federal and local efforts.
This administration is doing and will continue to do what we can to help bring an end to this tragedy.
For grieving mothers, the new coordinated effort does little to end the despair and frustration.
It was always, we got it, we doing it, and nothing is being done. Nothing is being done.
There was often little or no evidence at the crime scenes. In fact, most of the crime scenes that I recall having attended and having gone to investigate were cases where the bodies were, in most cases, severely decomposed.
Then, in early 1981, the police announce a new line of investigation. They have begun collecting fibers found on the victims, looking for a clue that will link the victims to their killer or killers.
About 2 hours later, the body was brought out. A medical examiner said it was a young black man in his early 20s.
The fiber announcement may have alerted the killer. 4 more bodies are found in Metro Atlanta's Chattahoochee River. The task force list now stands at 27 victims.
We concluded from that the killer was paying attention to the news reports and thought he was going to, by unclothing the victims, throwing them in the river, that this would cause us not to be able to find the same trace evidence.
But the experts are able to recover fibers, and the river cases prompt the authorities to begin nighttime stakeouts at all Chattahoochee Bridge crossings. After 2 weeks, their patience is rewarded. When we return, is this the man who terrorized a city? In the pre-dawn hours of May 22nd, the surveillance of Atlanta's bridges pays off. A policeman hears what could be a body hitting the water.
According to the record in the case, 3:00 a.m. in the morning, Robert Campbell, who was a young police recruit under the bridge, heard a splash and then saw lights come on a vehicle. And so the vehicle slowly began to move in a southerly direction across the bridge.
Wayne Williams admits he was on the bridge that night.
I proceeded south at that point towards Atlanta on South Cobb Drive, which is our Bankhead Highway. I crossed the bridge. As I crossed the bridge, I was looking for a telephone.
But he says he did not stop and did not throw anything into the river. When the police follow and stop him near the bridge, Williams cooperates fully.
Well, Wayne was questioned, and then he allowed the authorities to search his car, and then he noticed on one of the officers a task force badge.
And I looked at him and said, "Oh, you were the task force." And by that time, the FBI agent walked back up, and he didn't say anything. And I said, "Oh, this is about those kids, isn't it?" And that was exactly what I said.
And they questioned him some more, searched the car, and then they let him go.
3 days later, on May 24th, the body of Nathaniel Cater was found less than a mile downstream from the Jackson Parkway Bridge.
The oldest victim yet, 27, was found in the Chattahoochee River.
With this discovery, the authorities decide that Wayne Williams is the prime suspect. 13 days later, the FBI questions Williams at their office for 12 hours.
And when I got back upstairs, my dad was in there. And at that point, I just broke down and went to crying with my father. I said, you know, what's going on here?
In terms of our efforts tonight, we have not ended up with the information that would result in an arrest.
The last thing that was said as I was leaving the office, McGrath, and I'm going to use his words, looked at me and said, I'm going to get your ass.
By that time, the media vans had started to camp out at Wayne's house, and the circus began for the next 17 days.
All right, everybody on this property are pressing against you two criminal trespass.
When you're trying to get in your own home, you've got to literally fight your way through a sea of people. And in our efforts to try and get these people away from the house so we could have a normal life, it was frustrating.
Meanwhile, a lawyer for the man questioned, Wayne Williams, said he would go to court next week to try to stop harassment by the news media and police.
The news is saturated with information about him. 23 years old, he still lives with his parents, who are retired school teachers. He is their only child. His early years were promising. In grade school, he was installed as student council president by civil rights leader Andrew Young. As an adolescent, Williams operated a small radio station out of his parents' home. In later years, Williams worked as a freelance photographer for the Atlanta Fire Department and local television stations. More recently, he had embarked on a career as a talent scout with music business aspirations. To authorities, there was a sinister reason for this new ambition.
Start with Williams he was not professional in this regard, but he spent his own money to give kids who couldn't sing, who couldn't play an instrument, he still gave them an audition. And I submit to you that this was his bait that he used to get kids to come around him.
Just because I didn't get a hit record out by the time I was 23, does that make me a failure? Well, if that's the case, then there are a lot of failures in this world.
Despite their suspicions, the police refrained from arresting Wayne Williams.
We were looking at him very strongly, but we were nowhere near the point of arresting him. That was a decision made by the task force on its own.
Lewis Slayton did not have sufficient evidence to link Wayne Williams with any of the names on the task force list, but was under tremendous political pressure to make an arrest in this case.
I remember the former district attorney of Fulton County, Lewis Slayton, publicly saying, I don't think we have any evidence to arrest anybody, including Wayne Williams. But he was basically told, if you don't do it, the federal government will do it. So they pressured the former district attorney to move on Wayne Williams.
On Father's Day, June 21st, with the FBI and state government pressing, District Attorney Lewis Slayton orders the arrest of Wayne Williams.
When you hear those words, Mr. Williams, you're under arrest, I can't even describe how I felt. It was like time just froze. Everything just stopped at that point. And I can remember them telling me to go ahead and get myself dressed and all. My mom started crying and all. I can remember that.
He is charged with the murder of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater, whose body was found in the river 2 days after Williams was stopped near the bridge. He is later charged with the death of 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne.
There was a lot of pressure on Atlanta, I think, to find somebody. Convention dollars are very important to Atlanta. A lot of corporations were canceling their conventions in Atlanta that following summer.
Less than 7 months later, on January 6, 1982, the trial of the decade begins with the world watching.
Williams' lawyers did not ask to have the trial moved from Atlanta. They believe he can get a fair trial here.
In a surprise move, and in response to local hysteria, the judge allows the prosecution to introduce evidence of 10 additional deaths, alleged to be part of a larger pattern of murders. Now, in effect, Williams must defend himself on 12 counts, even though he is officially charged with only 2 murders.
Whenever you have a trial where the prosecution is permitted to introduce evidence of other crimes, the fact that the jury hears that the defendant is a criminal in some way weighs very, very heavily on them. It's almost impossible for them to get it out of their mind.
The prosecution alleges 2 motives for the killing spree. They suggest that Williams is a sexual predator.
I have never had a homosexual relationship with anybody. I'm not gay, never been gay, and And this was obvious. This was part of their psychological profile that I think they had a behavioral analyst come up with. And what they did was they tried to go out and find any of these witnesses they could to say, well, we need you to say this about Wayne Williams, you need to say that. Nobody who knows me, that the prosecution knows me, ever testified that I was homosexual or anything else.
The prosecution also claims that Williams is motivated by a deep loathing for other blacks.
According to testimony, Williams felt that these victims were degrading to his race.
Contrary to what a lot of people have said about me, I worked almost exclusively with low-income blacks. In other words, this garbage about, well, I hated my race, or no, that's ridiculous.
For more than 2 months, the jury sits through evidence which is often complex and technical. Then, the day that no one there will ever forget. Williams takes a stand in his own defense. For 2 days, the jury sees a calm and collected Wayne Williams. On the third day, defense investigator Durwood Myers urges a new strategy.
So Durwood sat down with me. He said, well, Wayne, I need you to be forceful on that witness stand. When he says something, challenge it.
I remember watching the jury when he testified this way, on cross-examination. Every eye was on Williams.
He came out fighting. He was combative, argumentative. He called the police names, referred to me in a derogatory way.
In my heart, I honestly think if that incident had not have happened on that witness stand, I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
On February 27, 1982, the jury finds Wayne Williams guilty of murdering Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne.
That after 9 weeks of hearing evidence, the jury in this case was out and deliberated only one day, and came back with a verdict. They were convinced beyond any doubt of his guilt.
He begins serving 2 consecutive life sentences. Shortly afterwards, 24 murder cases are officially closed and attributed to Wayne Williams, but not without public outcry.
Parents came forward at that point and said, don't just close the case. If you believe he did it, try him for them. And they said they didn't want to waste the taxpayers' money.
The blanket closing of the books, I think, is what created so much outcry among families of these children.
The authorities are trying to close the books to have the media attention focused away from Atlanta on these negative killings.
The closing of the cases effectively branded Wayne Williams the Atlanta child murderer. When we return, why many believe Wayne Williams was framed. One fact seemed to confirm the guilt of Wayne Williams. After his arrest, it appeared the killing stopped.
The killing stopped. Practically stopped dead in his tracks. So I say he was the man.
Dr. Joseph Burton, chief medical examiner at the time for DeKalb and Cobb counties in metro Atlanta, says it's not that simple.
But by no means did the deaths of young black children and young black men stop with the arrest and conviction of Wayne Williams. I would say that there was a change in profile in the finding of bodies of deceased young people around Atlanta.
But others argued there never was any pattern, that the list compiled by authorities was arbitrary and meaningless.
The only thing that was common among all the victims on the list was they were black.
Chet Dettlinger was the former assistant to the Atlanta chief of police.
Well, in this case, if you look at it real strongly, you had victims who were shot, you had victims who were strangled, you had victims who were stabbed, you had victims who were bludgeoned, you had victims who were suffocated, and most of them were, quote, unknown. They don't know how they died.
Dettlinger and Los Angeles Times reporter Jeff Prue wrote The List, a controversial book that attacked the task force list.
There was no pattern per se that I could really see other than that they were dead.
Even public officials had doubts about the way the list was being compiled. Dick Hand was the public safety commissioner for DeKalb County at that time.
The list that was created by the task force, in my own personal opinion, was an artificial list. I never felt that all the people involved on that list were directly related to Wayne Williams. I think there were cases on there that should have never been on the list.
There was no single factor, no smoking gun or no signature that said this case and this case and this case are people that have been murdered or killed by the same individual.
But the list served the prosecution's purpose. It was a way to link the killings to each other and to Wayne Williams. They chose 10 cases from the task force list, 8 children and 2 adults. This in turn allowed the prosecution to introduce different pieces of evidence from the 12 different cases. The most important evidence linking Williams to the victims was minute textile fibers.
Well, without the fiber evidence, they probably couldn't have convicted him because there was simply insufficient evidence to tie him to the 2 murder victims for which he was on trial, let alone any of these other children.
After his arrest, police removed fiber samples from cars Williams had used and from the Williams home, including a bedspread, carpet, and throw rug.
Fibers are not the basis of an absolute identification by themselves. Now, at some point in time when you have multiple fiber matches, you reach a probability, even though you can't determine a number, where it's so small that it essentially is an identification.
But in its eagerness to establish fiber matches, the prosecution blundered. They claimed fibers found on victim Charles Stevens proved he had been in 2 cars driven by Williams. The defense proved that neither of the cars was in Williams' possession when Stevens disappeared and was found dead. One was a 1970 Chevy station wagon.
Charles Stevens disappeared on October 9th, turned up dead on October 10th. The Williamses didn't obtain the 70 Chevy station wagon until October 21st.
And October 21st was the date that the Williams had picked up the car from a relative in Columbus, Georgia.
By the time they obtained that car, Charles Stevens was already in the ground.
I can always see how a fiber from a vehicle that had been in your possession sometime in the past might have gotten transferred to a victim, but I could never understand how a fiber from a vehicle you hadn't bought yet could get transferred to a victim who's already in the ground. I could never understand that one, but that happened in this case.
The other car was a 1979 Ford LTD. The defense proved that this car was being repaired at a local dealership when Stevens disappeared. So Wayne Williams couldn't have had the car at the time of Stevens' disappearance and death. The FBI's fiber expert now concedes he was wrong.
Based on everything that I know right now, that match was incorrect in the sense that those fibers did not come from the 1979 Ford.
But there was another fiber match, one the defense could not so easily discredit. This fiber, called trilobal, because of its distinctive shape, was found on 10 of the victims. Samples taken from a green carpet in the Williams home were also trilobal. The distinctive fiber was manufactured by the Wellman Company of Dalton, Georgia.
The Wellman fiber in the Williams case was unusual because of its cross-sectional shape. Different manufacturers use different cross-sectional shapes in their production so they can recognize their fiber. And in that particular case, the shape that we were seeing before we even knew that it was a Wellman fiber, I recognized as being highly distinctive and something that had not been seen before.
The prosecution claimed the green trilobal fiber had been used in only a small number of Atlanta area homes.
I went to Wellman and talked to the folks up there, and what I found out was, first of all, they questioned only about the carpet found in Wayne Williams' house.
At the time that these crimes were committed, there was, in my opinion, very little carpet like the Williams carpet in the city of Atlanta.
Wellman made 3 or 4 or 5 different rugs with the same fibers as the Wayne Williams rug. But more importantly, they didn't count the commercial fibers, which went in apartments and bowling alleys and businesses and every place else. So what they made sound like a very, very small number of possibilities was actually much broader than that.
But there were other problems with the physical evidence as well. When police found a type B blood speck beneath Williams' car seat, it matched none of the victims. The prosecution was left with only one choice: add another victim to the list.
And it dawned on the authorities that they didn't have any type B victims. in their list. So they went out and got a 28-year-old stabbing victim who had died in April of '81, named John Porter. And he had been stabbed in downtown Atlanta, and he was a type B victim, and they went ahead and added his case not only to the list, but to the pattern, the 10 pattern cases.
He had fibers on him, so the question was, do you use it or do you not? It appeared to be similar. We used it.
It's sort of like the fiber evidence. It could not stand alone to link Wayne Williams or anyone else to a particular crime. By itself, it would mean nothing, basically.
When we return, has an innocent man been behind bars for more than 20 years? Wayne Williams had first become a suspect the night police say he threw the body of Nathaniel Cater from the James Jackson Parkway Bridge. If Williams wasn't disposing of a body, what was he doing on the bridge at 2:50 in the morning?
At the time, I was engaged in a series of music auditions for a company that I had, a talent company. And I think it was on May the 20th, that afternoon, there was a young lady that called by the name of Cheryl Johnson.
Williams claims he had scheduled an interview with Cheryl Johnson. On the night he was stopped by police, he had been at a nightclub. On his way home, he says, he decided to confirm Johnson's address before their meeting the next morning.
As I crossed the bridge, I was looking for a telephone because I was going to try one more time to verify this address that I had on Cheryl Johnson.
In fact, Williams never succeeded in contacting Johnson. If she really did exist, she may have given him the wrong address and the wrong number.
We're sorry. Your call did not go through.
So I figured by now, well, you know, this was a wild goose chase, so I'm going to go ahead and head back to Atlanta.
Now, over a period of several days, he was interviewed by the FBI, and he held a news conference. And he gave differing versions of that same story.
It has always been held against Williams' credibility that he claimed to be crossing the bridge in search of a phone. Now, for the first time, he explains.
Okay, well, I know a lot of people always have asked the question, well, how come if I were going back to Atlanta, I just didn't continue south on James Jackson Parkway and went back across the bridge? At the time these murders were going on, I knew these people were staking out from the bridges because I had a lot of friends who were police officers. And I'll be honest with you, I was just curious as to what I could see in the area that night. So I said, well, I've got to go back home, so I'll just go by this way to see what I can see.
I don't think Wayne Williams ever stopped on the bridge. I don't think he ever came close to stop. I don't think anybody stopped on the bridge. They had to have probable cause, so they said, well, you know, this guy stopped on the bridge and his body went in the water. It didn't happen.
I never stopped on the bridge. I never threw anything off the bridge, and nobody ever testified that I did.
And there's more. There was a witness who said he met and talked with Nathaniel Cater the day after the prosecution claims Williams threw Cater's body off the bridge.
There was also another witness, by the way, who said he saw Nathaniel Cater the day after Wayne Williams was supposed to dump his body in the water.
The man was Jimmy Tightrope Anthony, and he wouldn't have been mistaken about Cater's identity. He and Cater were neighbors. Jeff Prue later interviewed Tightrope Anthony.
Anthony told me that he was going downtown to pay his rent at the Healy Building in the heart of downtown Atlanta, and that while he was entering the building, he happened to see Nathaniel Cater sitting nearby. And he said, "Nate, how you doing?" He says, "I'm doing fine. I got myself a new job."
If Anthony's story was correct, Wayne Williams could not have killed Cater.
The state was trying to tell us that Nathaniel Cater was dead either on the Thursday night, May 21st, or he was dead when he went into the water on Friday morning, May 22nd.
But amazingly, the defense decided not to call Tightrope Anthony to testify because it did not fit in with their strategy. The other man Wayne Williams was convicted of murdering was Jimmy Ray Payne. But Payne's death certificate listed the cause of death as undetermined rather than homicide.
Because you can't indict a person and charge him for unknowing somebody or undetermining somebody. You got to have a homicide before you can indict somebody for murder.
Subsequently, medical examiner Sali Zaki changed the cause of death to read homicide.
There's nothing strange or wrong with that. documents are amended or changed when need to be.
In other words, he never changed his opinion. On the death certificate, it was down as undetermined. On the autopsy, which he had done, which was his official report of it, it was down as homicide.
It was never down as homicide. In that report, it states that Jimmy Ray Payne died of asphyxia, which means he stopped breathing, by undetermined mechanism. That doesn't say homicide.
During the trial, the defense questioned the medical examiner and got him to admit Payne might not have been murdered after all.
And finally, under cross-examination, he says he couldn't rule out accidental drowning in Jimmy Ray Payne's death.
For many, the deaths of both Cater and Payne remain mysterious. But if Wayne Williams wasn't the Atlanta killer, then who was? When we return, another death and another suspect. If Wayne Williams wasn't the serial killer who terrorized Atlanta, then who was? One answer may lie in the murder of a little boy named Clifford Jones.
The Clifford Jones case was the case that convinced me that they had no case against Wayne Williams.
In August 1980, nearly a year before Williams was arrested, Eunice Jones and her children came to Atlanta from Cleveland, Ohio, for a family reunion. On the afternoon of August 20, Eunice asked her sons Clifford and Emmanuel to make a trip to the local supermarket.
We already was stressing, for them not to separate, from each other. That's why we had all three of them go together. Because all these children kept coming up murdered, coming up found in the woods and stuff, and we were scared it was gonna happen to them.
This is where police, acting on a tip, found Clifford Jones's body less than 24 hours after he disappeared, beside this dumpster behind a laundromat on Hollywood Road.
12-year-old Clifford Jones' name was quickly added to the task force list. Complete police files on the Jones case did not become public until 5 years after Williams was tried and convicted. The files reveal another suspect, a suspect the police and the FBI knew about, but the jury in the Williams trial did not.
What we didn't know was that the police were able to question eyewitnesses. They were able to even question the suspect in this case, who was not Wayne Williams. He was a 29-year-old black male named Jamie Brooks, who ran the laundromat and lived in a back room behind the laundromat.
One of the eyewitnesses was a young man named Freddie Cosby. He told investigators he saw Jamie Brooks and another man named Calvin Smith sexually assault and kill young Clifford Jones.
He said they took him in the back room and they got him in the butt and he started screaming, and they tied a yellow rope around his neck and they pulled on that rope until one of them said, "He's dead."
Two additional eyewitnesses who lived in a cottage immediately behind the laundromat saw Jamie, or someone who looked like Jamie, wearing a hooded robe.
And he was carrying something heavy draped in his arm, and it was wrapped in plastic. That's what they said. And so we thought it was strange because he walked right past the dumpster right behind the laundromat, and he walked past it, and he walked on down to the next dumpster. And he laid it out there in front of the dumpster. Then he disappeared around the corner.
People across the street who saw the person from the laundromat carrying a bag to a dumpster, and they may well have seen a person carrying a bag to a dumpster.
Detective Sidney Dorsey was present when eyewitness Freddie Cosby was questioned. Despite some inconsistencies, he remains convinced of Cosby's reliability.
Based on the evidence that I heard given by Cosby and those who gave us testimony, even though it wasn't a positive identification, I'd have been very comfortable in arresting Jamie Brooks and bringing him to justice.
Jamie Brooks and Calvin Smith had been questioned. They had took lie detector tests, and they found all of them. But then they let both of them go. They knew that he had killed my baby, and they let him go.
Because it looked like he was a very good suspect, and then everything that looked good didn't exist. it simply fell apart and nothing matched as far as that person being a suspect.
Well, you know, I mean, I don't know what other kind of evidence you need to at least charge a guy to murder. I mean, you talk about probable cause. They had plenty of probable cause. But what they said, they came up with a story that, well, the witness wasn't believable because he was retarded.
He wasn't retarded because he named everything on my son's body, from his sports shirts to his sports shorts to his blue jeans up under his sports shorts to his green and white tennis shoes.
There was a telling piece of evidence tying the murder of Clifford Jones to many of the cases: the unusual green trilobal fiber.
This green trilobal fiber found on Clifford Jones was the same fiber that they used against Wayne Williams in the Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne cases.
The jury never heard anything about Clifford Jones because the prosecution chose not to make him one of the 10 pattern cases.
Had it been one of the pattern cases, they would have been able to put witnesses up on the stand who said, "I saw Jamie Brooks strangle this boy," and that would have toppled their case like a house of cards.
In March of 1981, Jamie Brooks was imprisoned on an unconnected rape charge. In 1987, he died of AIDS.
Strange thing, Jamie Brooks went to the penitentiary about the time these murders stopped. Isn't that interesting? You know, everybody says, well, Wayne Williams went to jail, his murder stopped. Well, when Jamie Brooks went to jail, murder stopped too.
Clifford Jones' mother and brother do not believe the death of Jamie Brooks really closed the case, or that justice has been done.
But, you know, being deceased does not justify what they did while they were still here. And they really need to be brought to justice. That's the only thing I'm fighting for, is for it to be brought to justice. And so my brothers can rest, you know.
They told me let Jamie and them go because they had who they wanted for killing Clifford, which was Wayne Williams. Wayne Williams ain't doing no time for killing my child. He ain't doing no time for killing now child.
When we return, will the full truth ever be known about the Atlanta murders? The conventional belief, even today, is that Wayne Williams is the Atlanta child killer. But it may not be that simple.
We still don't know where, when, how, or why these victims died.
There should be no conclusion except that there was only one person that could have and did murder these victims, and he had been convicted. It's been upheld by the highest court in this state, and we now need to let it rest.
One man does not wish to let it rest. In 1983, Justice George Smith was the only member of the Georgia Supreme Court who voted to give Wayne Williams a new trial.
There just simply was not a common thread that ran through all 10 of these cases compared to the two. One of the first things is these were both adults, so they were using the children to prejudice the jury against the defendant because the two that he was being tried for were adults.
We've got witnesses who've been discredited, witnesses who've recanted. We've got possible Ku Klux Klan involvement that was never known to the defense during Wayne Williams' trial. And we've got stronger suspects that were involved with some of these victims, suspects who are known child molesters.
So you have to ask yourself, or I had to ask myself, how does one person, how does a Wayne Williams get 27 people together basically in isolated instances, manage to overcome all of them without obvious sign of any physical trauma having been inflicted?
You know, so it wasn't just fiber. You had fiber, you had the bridge, and this host of other little pieces of evidence, all of which I think the jury obviously felt showed guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
I think the court did prove it to the satisfaction of 12 people, and that's what was required.
It may very well be that Wayne Williams Jones killed some number or all of these children, or none of them. We're never going to know that.
I sincerely believe that the killers of those victims, the adults and the children, are still loose.
I don't believe he did it no more than I would go out there and shoot somebody myself.
I have never believed Wayne Williams killed not only Yusuf. I don't believe Wayne Williams killed anybody. I think Wayne Williams is merely one of the last victims of the Atlanta murders.
And I'm not saying anything I didn't say when I wrote my opinion. I would have given him a new trial then, I give him a new trial now.
Well, I think all of those involved, from the mayor of Atlanta through the public safety commissioner, you know, they owe Atlantans, they owe these families, and they owe Wayne Williams some answers to questions that have never fully been resolved.
Wayne Williams has been in prison since his arrest in June of 1981, when he was 23 years old.
At this point, what has to happen is the Georgia courts or some court has to have the courage and the guts to stand up and say, look, we made a mistake. There is no pattern, as the prosecution alleged in this case. Nobody saw Wayne Williams kill or hurt anybody.
Is Wayne Williams an innocent victim of injustice, or is he a killer? At least one man, Wayne Williams, knows for sure.